panels that we have over the next couple of days with directors of admissions and career services. I hope that you're all catching those. There's so much insight and expertise. We also want to make sure that we bring in a lot of the more personal voices of individuals that have actually lived the business school experience. And it's my pleasure to welcome Jonathan Franco. Jonathan is from the Harvard Business School class of 2023, freshly graduated. You only just folded up that gown and put it back in the closet. Jonathan's LinkedIn profile has a very interesting statement. He talks about a passion for developing the growth in products and in people. And I'd love to find out a lot more about how he's grown as a person during the 2 years in Boston. So, Jonathan, over to you. Perhaps just a brief intro about undergrad at UPenn and Wharton, some of the strategy consulting you've been doing, and then we can get to where business school fit in your personal and professional development.
Yeah, for sure. You hit the high notes. So first, thanks for having me. Two, I did my undergraduate. I was actually in the Huntsman program. So I was dual degree. So that was University of Pennsylvania for international studies, and then I did Wharton for economics. And I love my time at Penn. It led me on my path to become a consultant, which I did for, as you already mentioned, for a couple of years. I started off doing marketing consulting, and then I shifted into more strategy, still with a focus on marketing, but strategy and brand consulting. And I did that for, I want to say, about 5 years before I matriculated to Harvard. I think what basically brought me to want to apply to business school, not even Harvard, just business school in the first place, was I was one of the candidates that was going through work over COVID. And like many of my colleagues who applied, we saw many things across a variety of industries that sort of bothered us, or that gave us the idea of, man, wouldn't that be ripe for disruption? And I was one such person. Mine was specifically focused on education and all of different ways that we could hopefully disrupt education. And so I applied to a bunch of different business schools with an idea, a sort of statement of purpose on how I thought education could be transformed or changed.
Now, often the admissions office looks for the roots of that sense of purpose. You mentioned the pandemic, but already you had a number of years of mentoring, tutoring, working on financial literacy programs. Do you think that's a sort of the reflection of the Harvard student that's also thinking of the welfare of other individuals and how you can support their growth and development?
Yeah, I would say so. It's an interesting question. I don't know that it's always necessary to have that community mindset to go to Harvard, but I would say it's a very strong commonality. Most of my classmates and sort of as I've done sort of admissions consulting for the past couple of years, what I've seen with successful candidates is they do tend to have that sort of streak of community driven ship, if such a word could exist. I mean, I certainly didn't do nearly as much as some of my colleagues did, but I think what I did demonstrate was a passion. And I demonstrated sort of a history of being interested in that space. And I had an idea that I have now deconstructed, I don't know how many different times, and that's okay. I think the question you're really asking is, how necessary is it to have that community mindset? And while I don't think it is necessary, I do think it helps you stand out. And it doesn't even have to be, you don't have to have cured cancer or anything, but I think just showing them that you're interested and the steps you've taken and sort of where you think your next path might be, even if you change it, but it shows thought leadership. And I think that's really what they're looking for.
The incoming class, which will be the class of 2025, it has a median GMAT, a record 740. We won't go into your GMAT score unless you choose to. But in terms of some of the magic dust, the cello, musical instrument, do you feel that there's place for this rounded individual that has those other passions and creative interests?
I think so. I definitely think so. I know this was before my time, but I know one of my friends and she got in across the board. She did not have a traditional background, but she was a professional ballet dancer. And so where that sort of took her was to New York. And then from New York, she realized she was very interested in creative marketing. And then she did creative marketing and she applied with, I can't even remember the specifics of the idea, but it was something tied into her passion for dance. And so to your question, right? you have people who are just well-rounded. They've done, more traditional sectors and they have passions on the side. But if you are someone who is just a very creative individual and you pursue these things outside of work, I think, test scores notwithstanding, that's a different conversation. But I do know of successful candidates that just have this sort of art or passion or music that sort of becomes the centerpiece of their essay and their story and kind of drives them to higher heights of leadership, because ultimately that's what I think AppCom is looking for is this someone who could be an excellent leader one day? And what are the markings and trappings? What does that look like?
Right. You touched on that sort of kernel of an idea during the pandemic of disruption, disruption in industry, certainly with Clay Christensen, that of course was part of the Harvard faculty, sadly lost to us. But the idea of disruption. So the break in your own career, you touched on it briefly, but deciding on an MBA, our viewers might say, well, he's got a Harvard MBA. It was a no-brainer, right? But I mean, did you go through some sort of Excel spreadsheet that looked at the pros and the cons? It's a big investment.
It is a massive investment. And as someone who candidly is now going through the process of paying that investment off, yes, I very much did consider it. Um, I think on the one hand, because I was fortunate enough that I received full rides to other institutions, and I did turn those down to go to Harvard. And part of it was, I know people are listening, they're like, well, of course you did. It was Harvard. How could you not? But honestly, it wasn't, there was something about being a general management type of leader that really appealed to me. My boss at my old company, the CEO, he attended Harvard, and sort of the way that he comported himself was basically taking little bits of knowledge from everywhere you go and knowing enough to be dangerous and knowing enough to be an effective operator. And there is something that I think is invaluable about that, no matter what you do, even if you want to highly specialize. If you want to be highly specialized in tech and biopharma or anything of that nature, I understanding how people work and what motivates them, and more importantly, understanding what role you can play, because that's a lot of the things that before you go to business school you don't always understand. I know I certainly didn't. And so that was the value I was hoping to capture and to extract. I can happily say that is a lot of what I think I've taken away. Without prattling on for too long, there was a very significant cost benefit analysis that went into it. I knew from the moment I filled out Harvard's essay, because I actually didn't know the essay before I started. Like, I didn't research it beforehand. I just sort of did all my applications in one block. And I knew from the moment that I read the essay, it was so, in my opinion, very elegantly simple, that was a place that I wanted to go. I thought it was a very, very clever way of trying to get at who are you, what matters most to you, without deliberately asking the question. And I like the idea of having a broad network. 1,000 people is a lot. And so now that I've graduated, I can tell you, I have had a very large, very broad network. And so that was incredibly appealing to me. So that was worth the investment. Hopefully that answers your question.
It does. And Harvard in the application doesn't say why Harvard. I know that people are tempted to say, well, the case method, but it's been around for 102 years. Tell us about the HBS learning experience, including course load and just what a typical week might look like.
Sure, yeah. So I would say it varies significantly between first year and second year. And at Harvard, they have a very idiosyncratic name, which is RC versus EC. RC stands for required curriculum. EC is elective curriculum. I hope I'm getting that right, but I think that's right. What a typical caseload might look like. So in your first year, when you're in RC, you take the same classes with your section in the same seat for the full year. So there is a pivot halfway through the year, but for the most part, you're taking the same classes with the same people. And that's the traditional MBA. That's where you're taking finance one, finance two, marketing, operations management, things of that nature. Once that's done, then you proceed to EC year. And EC year, you can pick whichever classes you want. You can highly specialize if you want to. I knew I wanted to do tech, so I took a lot of classes focused on tech. I actually took a computer science class to learn how to code in my second semester. So it's really highly a la carte. You can choose your own adventure in the second year. And it's a lot of reading. And I mean, I won't lie to you. I mean, everyone jokes that, oh, MBAs, they don't actually do that much work. And of course, there's always an element of truth to it. But I will say it is a fair amount of reading. And then you can take away from that however much you'd like. If you don't want to read, you certainly don't have to. You'll be penalized for it. So you should. but it's what you want to extract from it. I will say probably the best skill I took away from having to read, geez, I think at the end, I don't remember the exact number, but we read at least 3 cases a day. So you can do the math, 3 cases a day, 5 days a week, times 2 years. So it teaches you to be very intentional about your time. And that is something that I think is invaluable for any manager, whether you start your own thing, is time is not an unlimited resource. You have to be very judicious. And if I give you 20 pages, and it's up to you to determine, well, what are the pages that are most relevant to you and how do you extract them? And I think probably deliberately, it's a revealed preference that Harvard does is they kind of force you to learn that because it throws so much at you to say, I mean, I've only talked about academics. The social calendar is its own thing, which deserves its own video. But the nugget I want to put across is it teaches you to be very intentional. And a lot of that is in the way the case method is structured. So that was an excellent learning that I took away.
And famously, of course, cold calling, and you've got to be relevant, insightful in what, 60 seconds?
Something like that. Yeah. Having been the unfortunate victim of it more times than I would care to count. Yeah, there's nothing quite like getting that bolt of lightning with 100 people staring at you, and you have to uh, speak, hopefully eloquently, or blather through it if you're me, whatever comes first.
You mentioned everything that then takes place beyond the classroom. Tell us a little bit about the culture, other opportunities for leadership development, groups, organizations. I mean, there's so much going on at the school.
There is so much. I would say the blessing of it is that it's completely up to you as an individual. No one forces you to take anything on. So you've gone through high school, you've gone through college, or whatever your secondary education is, depending on where in the world you're from. And a lot of times people will take on leadership positions to prepare for the next step. Well, there is no more of that. For many people, this is the last tranche of education you're going to go through. So it's completely up to you for what you want to take on. I was an admissions representative. I was the co-president of an esports and gaming club because that stuff was just interesting to me. But I certainly didn't have to. No one forced me to do it. It was just something that I liked. It's completely up to you. I would say what ends up taking the most time outside of clubs, it's really the social scene, and that's the most common answer you'll hear. You're going to meet so many people, so many different people from so many different walks of life, and you only have, what is it, like 20 months, something like that. It's not even a full 2 years. You have 20 months to get to know them, to find people who you want to learn from, who want to learn from you, and just make lifelong friends, and kind of learn how to operate as a professional. Because even though it's social, there's always a learning of knowing how to talk to someone and learn about who they are in maybe 5 minutes or less, which I think is actually a very useful skill for not just corporate, but just really anywhere in life that you go. So again, I could probably go into more detail, but I know we don't have a ton of time. So I would say the two biggest, I would say social calendar, which is, being friendly, takes up a ton of time. And of course, there are clubs and leadership roles you can take on, but it's non-compulsory. It is literally whatever you want. And they have clubs that range to the very general to the most esoteric. So you'll find your people.
If you could give advice to Jonathan back on day one, if you can remember what that was like, just in terms of prioritizing and finding your time, to take the time to think about what you're really passionate about?
So let's see. I think you're asking me what number one piece of advice would I give myself from when I first started? Is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, I know this is gonna sound very trite, but there are so many amazing people that go to Harvard and any business school you get into. And there's 1,000 of them, really 2,000 if you count the class above you. There's one piece of advice I would have given myself, even though I think I'm a fairly friendly person, to just try to talk to more people, take up anyone on any opportunity to go for a coffee chat, to go for a walk, to go to a bar, to go rock climbing, and your social calendar will fill up super quickly. And it is exhausting. But for many of these people, you'll never get this opportunity again. And they got in for a reason, for sometimes reasons very distinct from you. And I think it's very important to recognize that there's always things that we can learn from other people in any circumstance. And so one piece of advice I'd give myself to recap, try to meet even more people, try to keep yourself open, try to just, yeah, do that.
Well, you said it's down to 20 months, including, of course, the summer internship between year one and year two. How did the program support you both to prepare, for finding the right summer internship and then ultimately, of course, graduating and the job search that's involved with that?
Yeah, yeah. So it's funny because in my year, at least for the EC graduation, so 2023, as many of you are probably aware, we graduated into a little less of a friendly macroeconomic climate. I would say in terms of finding the internship, a lot of times it's word of mouth. So we have an online job platform called 1220. That's just the name of it. I'm sure every business school has their version of it. Um, and that's where you go to find job postings. But the reality of it is most of the jobs you'll hear about are just from classmates chattering. You'll hear them talk about stuff they've applied to. Um, I also would say for anyone who's recently accepted or thinking of going or to any business school, don't feel constrained by that platform. I know many friends that they went through LinkedIn, they used alternate pathways, they used this as a risk-free time for them. So they would literally go way off the beaten path and they would talk to people in industries they never thought they might do. And you have, with the Harvard name behind you, you will find more doors will open for you than not, which is at least that's what we found. Um, we do have our career services, so that's CPD. And if you have questions about, hey, I have a competing offer, how do I handle it? You can email them or set a time to go into person with them, and they'll try to talk you through what they've advised students in the past on.
You must have had lots of expectations. There's so much on the chat forums about the Harvard experience, but something that really surprised you, perhaps that you didn't expect about the 2 years.
Oh boy. Um, Yeah, I would say it's really funny because when I did so right before we graduated, we came back together as a section, and the section experience is integral to HBS. I answered this very same question. This is going to sound like a meaningless tautology, but I would say what surprised me is that I found how unexpected I found my classmates. And I'll be specific. You look at the statistics and you see the types of industries people come from. You look at demographics, you can look at the schools, and you kind of think you have this idea of, oh, I know who this person is. I know sort of the palette that they're painting from. But if you actually take the time to talk to people individually and really listen, you would be surprised more often than not how people will surprise you. They do have an interesting perspective. They did come from a place you might not have expected. Um, and you'll start to see why. Because I think when you first meet people, everyone has this intense desire to fit in. And we all do that. We're social creatures, humans are. What I'd say what surprised me the most is how different everyone was. And that's the same advice I give to anyone who's thinking of applying is, you know, you don't have to look like the mold. In fact, more often than not, most people aren't the mold. They appear like the mold because that's what they want to show you, but really there's something deeply distinct about them that they articulate. And I would say what surprised me the most is how unexpected the people turned out to be. Can honestly say I was happy to be kind of wrong about what I thought I was going to get myself into.
Well, you've taken the time to very generously speak with us at the Centre Court MBA Festival. Perhaps, I mean, you offered one piece of advice for anybody that's watching and joining us. Big picture of the biggest advice as those are thinking about applying, maybe round two, maybe next year, just in terms of preparing yourself and even the introspection that's involved.
Yeah, I would say I would say the thing that I would tell anyone is don't be afraid, and I would encourage even to dig for the deep thing that drives you. And you'll hear this advice a lot, but I'll try to give it a little more structure. Sorry, I'm an ex-consultant. Something in your life that was truly pivotal, and it can be sometimes even the most mundane thing. If you think about even some of the greatest American authors, right? I mean, that was the fundamental tenet of transcendentalism, right? Is that even the most like random things in nature would sometimes compel them to have these great insights about life and philosophy, and to a smaller degree, right? I think that is what the essay is trying to get out of you. It is trying to understand what is the thing about you that without you wouldn't make you you.
Mm.
To say the word you 9 times in one sentence, but it's true. It is true. I think they want to know what is that deep part of you that compels you to want to pursue a career, or compels you to want to help people, or compels you to want to take that job in private equity or finance. And so even when you think you've got the answer, I would say the tactical part of what I'm saying is think about it, reflect on it, tell it to the people who know you the best, see how they feel about the thing that you've said, and then readjust accordingly. Um, yeah, that's I know that's not really doing it justice, but in 30 seconds, that's how I would say it.
Well, hey, if applying to business school and applying to HBS can perhaps bring that level of personal clarity and thinking, I mean, it's actually a gift to apply to school. You've certainly captured this with us for Centre. So, Jonathan, thank you for taking the time. We hope that next steps go wonderfully well. And it was great to have you at Centre.
Thank you so much, Matt. It was lovely to be a part of it. Thanks for inviting me.